Since it launched the Volt back in late 2010, Chevrolet has been one of a handful of mainstream automakers to at least make and sell large enough volumes of plug-in cars in North America to mean that it's long since gone past the 200,000th plug-in vehicle sold that was eligible for the full $7,500 tax credit under current US federal tax code. And while it hasn't been all that easy to get hold of a General Motors or a Holden plug-in vehicle in other parts of the world, let's face it, the Chevy Volt or Opel Ampera didn't do so well in Europe, Oceania or Australia. If you've been in the US, you've been at least able to buy a Chevy Volt or more recently a Chevy Bolt to get your GM plug-in vehicle fix. The Volt, no longer made, is already missed by many in the industry. The Bolt, meanwhile, well, it's a competent, long-legged car with a decent interior, a good range, and a newly updated battery pack for the 2020 model year. And it also happens to be GM's most reliable car on sale today. And over the last few years, GM has been promising us more plug-in cars are on the way, including a brand new SUV based off the Bolt. And there's even a plug-in pickup truck coming. And according to GM CEO Mary Barra, it's all part of a push by the automaker to become a leader in electric vehicles. Even if GM just sided with the current US administration in supporting rolling back fuel economy standards and supporting the stripping of California of its zero-emission vehicle mandates. So, yeah. Anyway, this past weekend in China, GM unveiled its latest all-electric model in the form of the Menlo EV. It's a car that's not quite a crossover and not quite a sedan. And since then, we've seen a lot of electric vehicle blogs and news sites ask why this is only a Chinese market car. After all, they note, this should be a global vehicle, right? And they would have a point when it comes to styling. The Menlo EV isn't too shabby in its appearance, and it looks a lot more like a mainstream mid-size crossover than the Bolt. Take some time to read up on the general reactions to it in the automotive world, and it's a very positive one. It's also larger than the Bolt. Some are even comparing the Menlo EV to Tesla's Model Y. A comparison I personally feel is something of a push, especially as one is designed to be a luxury car and one is designed to be a more family-oriented, everyday driver. Nevertheless, the question remains, why isn't the Menlo EV coming to the US, and why isn't it selling everywhere else in the world? The knee-jerk reaction at this point from many, I'm sure, is to claim that GM is actively trying to destroy the electric car and stop its growth, that this is the EV1 all over again, and that GM doesn't want to sell any electric cars, period. And I'm not going to get into that particular argument at this time, because, well, I don't think it's going to add anything to this video, even if it may or may not have some merits. So let's focus on the other reasons this car may not be coming to America, Europe, and the rest of the world. First, let's acknowledge the fact that automakers sell different cars in different markets. That's standard practice and has been for many years. In many situations, it's because a car company feels that a particular model may not sell so well in certain markets, and so they decide not to pursue the homologation process. That's a fancy name for going through all of the crash testing and compliance procedures that are required for a car to be sold in a particular given market. In this case, I think it's obvious from the reaction from the Menlo EV that demand isn't the case here. People are really eager to see it come to market, and its fairly conservative styling would help it become a great stealthy EV around the world. So what is the problem? Well, the first key may be to look at the specs for this vehicle. If we look at the published specs for the Menlo EV, there aren't that many, it's pretty easy to see that this is a car that isn't designed to beat others in the same market space, which I think is one reason why comparing it to the Model Y is so laughable. Instead, this is a Chinese market car with a range of 410 kilometers on the NEDC test cycle. That's a test cycle that is notoriously over-optimistic, and one which I should note has generally been superseded in large parts of the world by the more accurate WLTP test cycle. On the NEDC test cycle, for example, cars can often appear to have ranges that are as much as 30 to 50% higher than they would be in the real world. The 2016 Nissan Leaf has a range on the EPA test cycle of 172 kilometers, but on the NEDC test cycle, the same car is rated at 250 kilometers of range. If we look at the Menlo EV's rated 400 kilometres then on that test cycle, a real world figure for that should be closer to 285 kilometres. That is far less than the Bolt EV's 417 kilometres on the EPA test cycle, and frankly isn't going to gain a whole lot of interest from buyers in North America or other key markets, especially when 350 to 400 kilometres range real world is now becoming the bare minimum for any new electric car. Then there's the whole matter of homologation. While standards and regulations for Chinese market cars are improving a lot and are far more stringent than they were a decade ago, it's still a lot easier to make and sell a car for Chinese market consumers than it is to make and sell a car for, say, European consumers. Crash testing and other tests have historically been far less stringent than they have in other parts of the world, and thus it's possible that what GM was doing here with the Menlo EV couldn't make it to the US without significant tweaking to make it past US crash tests. How different are Chinese crash tests to the rest of the world? Well, I'm not saying that GM does this, but there was a news story last week about Chinese researchers using pigs and dogs as live crash test subjects in vehicle crash tests. So, yeah. Finally, there are incentives to bear in mind. The Chinese government is still heavily investing in electric vehicle technology, and there are some significant incentives in place to encourage automakers to build and sell Chinese market cars. Less incentives than there once were, but they are still there. It's conceivable, I am speculating here, I should note, that the Chinese government is giving GM some significant help in bringing this car to market in China. But then there's the company itself. The company that we think of as GM isn't the same as the GM in the rest of the world. In China, it's actually Shanghai General Motors Limited. It's a jointly owned venture between General Motors and SAIC Motor. It's also owned partly by the Chinese government that sells GM-branded vehicles in mainland China. It's conceivable that GM's agreement with SAIC and the government means it can't sell this car overseas because it may have been jointly developed or has the aforementioned funding, keeping it only as a Chinese car. It's pretty clear that GM isn't where it should be when it comes to electric vehicles, and it has blown past several of its promised reveal dates for new plug-in cars. And while I'd love to see something similar size to the Menlo EV come to other markets, I think it would need some significant upgrades to be competitive in the same place as other cars currently on sale in, say, the US or Europe. What do you think? Now that's it. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to help us make more videos like this, please do like, comment and subscribe. You can send us a couple of dollars our way every month through Patreon, support our LA Auto Show coverage, or support our coffee habit with Ko-fi, or buy some swag from our swag store. I'll be back soon with more content for you all to enjoy, but until then, keep evolving.